start on time. Recording on time. All right, so tonight, JC and I talked a little bit earlier. We both had our content ready, and I showed up. I said I'll probably need like an hour, hour and a half to do my stuff, and JC's like, well, I'm going to need 3 hours. So how are we going to do this tonight? Because we were going to split it, right? That's what we promised. And so after fighting, screaming, and yelling, a little bit of crying on JC's part, I think we came to um, the agreement that JC is just going to do the whole thing tonight, and he's going to cover React Native and mobile app development. So typically, in other boot camps, we don't usually go down this path a lot, but man, like in the last, I would say probably a couple years, maybe even just the last year, we have been getting a ton of requests in IoT to develop apps. And you'll notice that it's some in the before we really started doing a lot of it, because and we've always developed apps, like this isn't a new thing, but we've been noticing that we've always been telling our clients, particularly enterprise clients, hey, go out, find a design firm, find a front end development shop. They're going to do much better because typically I don't like to get put in the position of people coming back to me and saying I don't like that color or I don't like how that looks. It's all subjective, right? So typically we just try to stay away from it. Well, we learned very quickly that we can push that off onto someone, but the problem is that they tend to not understand IoT at all whatsoever. And that's a very difficult thing. You can, even just the simple system that we've set up here, we haven't even explored a lot of the depths of stuff, right? Provisioning and stuff like that, which we'll talk about. When we start talking and thinking about that, there's so many details that a front end developer, particularly when you're developing a mobile app, has to deal with that we tend to inherit really bad platforms that someone attempted, like a consulting company, big front end consulting company attempted for a company, wasted a couple $1 million on, and then we inherit it because the enterprise comes back to us and says, hey, can you do this better? And we're like, well, sure we can. That's kind of what we told you in the beginning, but you needed to learn the lesson first, right? Of saying maybe it's a little bit more difficult than making pretty pictures. And typically we end up taking most of it. In fact, that's probably happened on two or three things. So tonight we're going to focus on this mobile app development stuff. And pretty much everyone, I would think, at Technicity Modesto, I think we've all developed mobile apps by this point. I know JC has with Cardinal. Of course, Andrew's our rock star when it comes to that stuff. We take pretty much everything from him, the lead from him, because he's kind of a trailblazer on that stuff. But like Michael, everybody has developed a mobile app. So thought it would be good for this boot camp to really introduce you guys to this type of technology. Now you're not gonna see all of it. This is one flavor of it, but it's an important one to really know at least what exists out there, what your options are, and how to approach it. And if you have to do it, you'll notice that you can use React Native, which is what JC will do tonight, and you don't really have to change much from the front end development. So it's a pretty powerful thing, and you can still get native performance, close to native performance. So anyways, JC, I assume you're going to introduce, the differences between, really what native is and what the difference between, iOS and Android and stuff. So I won't drone
Yeah,
on.
I got a nice pretty diagram.
Sweet. All right, we'll take it away.
All right. Everybody see my screen here? All right. So if anybody's ever looked into mobile app development, you've probably heard of a handful of languages, and the two big platforms are iOS and Android, right? Now, if you wanted to develop a native iOS app, you would have to either use Swift, which is the newer language, or Objective-C, which was used more in the past. Similarly, for Android, you'd be working with Java. I think Kotlin is one of the newer languages that a lot of Android apps are actually developed with these days. Now, we can get away with writing mobile applications without knowing any Swift, Objective-C, Java, C, or C++. You can stay in JavaScript, which is why from the beginning of this boot camp, we've said how powerful JavaScript is. I mean, it can run server side, client side, not only in your browser, but you can also run it on your phone, right? Now, how it does this is it runs in this layer right here where you see these React Native libraries. And what they've done is within the main languages, they've created this layer where we have platform UI components, these core libraries that are wrapped into React Native components, right? And they've essentially gone in and rebuilt the JavaScript engine. I mean, you have your own event loop, everything else that's in a JavaScript interpreter, right? That's running on top of these languages. And then you get access to the platform API as well. Now, one of the things to note is you're going to have different core libraries that was going to run on iOS and Android, but to the developer who's creating this in React Native, it should be transparent. That is, you shouldn't really know or feel the difference. That being said, there's all kinds of people come out and want to take advantage of different core features that perhaps one cell phone has that a different one doesn't, or even one operating system has that the other doesn't, and they can go and create custom React Native components. And what that does is that can cause incompatibilities between the two different operating systems. Now, it could be necessary. Perhaps there's hardware on one phone that you really want to take advantage of for your specific application. You may need to go straight to React Native. Now, what we're going to do tonight is we're actually going to go one layer of abstraction above React Native. So everything will be in essentially React Native. We'll use the core React Native libraries, but we're going to use everything within the context of Expo. All right. So you can think of Expo as one abstraction layer above React Native, to where when you write an app in Expo, you will have the same code base and it will run both on iOS and on Android. And you won't have to worry about compatibility issues as long as you stay in that. Now, the drawback, if you think about it, of features that you have for mobile applications, you've got maybe a Venn diagram here, right? You've got your Android on one side and your iOS on the other. You're working in the overlap of those two those two circles, right? And so there are certain features that Expo, as to this date, doesn't support. One being Bluetooth, right? So if you need to start going towards Bluetooth, then you will probably need to do what's called injecting and actually work in straight React Native, right? So tonight we don't really need any of those extra features, and there's a lot of applications where it's very rare that we actually leave Expo. BJ, I mean, you can comment on this. Expo really does handle the majority of the cases, and if you can, you want to stay there because it's less work and less maintenance. Because the moment that you fork, now you've got two code bases. You got to keep driving forward every time there's feature changes, and you got to work through the idiosyncrasies of each of them. As long as you stay in Expo, you get that benefit. And hopefully by the end of the night, we get through building this mobile application, regardless of whether you guys are running on Android or you're running on iOS. You should be able to download the app that we're going to make tonight and run it on your phone.
Yep. The other thing I'll mention is Expo is a very powerful tool because Expo runs servers that will do your builds for you, which is really nice to have someone else take care of the building of the app, because otherwise you have to install Android Studio or Xcode, particularly if you're trying to develop on iOS. You kind of need a Mac. There's not too many other ways around that. It's going to be pretty hard to develop for an iPhone without a Mac. And so one of the things that they really allow with Expo is this ability to actually build on 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 their servers and just get the binary that you need to run on a phone. Very powerful type of platform, and you'll see all of this. It may not be very clear to you right now what we're saying, but it'll be very clear. And the alternatives are much more difficult and much more frustrating. So yeah, and to echo JC, what JC was saying, most of what we do, we stay in Expo, even for IoT apps. Expo, you can do Bluetooth. There are some things that you can't do, but they're pretty much Expo has a really nice API to access pretty much anything you would need at this point, and it's getting better every day. So
Yeah,
you can
that's a good point. They're always adding new things with every different release that they come out with of their SDK, right? And then I'll show you guys tonight on how you install that on your machine. You can get it through NPM. Once you get it installed, their tool set, and it's I'd say their cadence is about once a quarter,
yeah.
right? In terms of different release dates. And so, yeah, every single release date, the features are just getting more and more impressive. So it's not necessarily a theoretical limitation at this point. It's a lot of it's just time and evolving. So
Yep.
if you guys want to get a step ahead for when we actually publish this app tonight, you can go on to Google Play Store or go into the App Store for Apple and download. You'll see their icon looks like this upward arrow here with a little ball next to it. So you can go ahead and download that because you want to have that downloaded, and then what you'll do is you actually sign in. I'll give you credentials for the account that we're going to use, and you'll be able to scan a QR code or click a link and open the app directly right there, and it'll open as if it were installed app from one of the Play stores. So it's a really nice way to do your beta testing and whatnot as well. But what we're going to do tonight is here's the goal. We've got our web application, right? So we've got our login screen. We've got our different pages. This is our home screen. We can look at our vehicle set as well as our account page, and we can log out. And we're going to implement the same experience in a mobile app setting, all right? Now, what you want to install first is going to be something called Expo CLI. And that can actually be installed right through NPM. So you see this command here. I've already got it installed on my machine, so I don't need to do that. But if you run npm install -g for global Expo CLI, then you'll have these Expo tools. All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to get started. If I say which Expo CLI, you can see I've already got it installed here on my machine. And the command you start with is just expo init. You're going to get a couple questions here. So you can choose these templates that you want. I'm going to go with managed workflow, but we're going to go with a blank. So it's just a minimal app as clean as an empty canvas. I select that, and it's going to ask me what I want the app to be named. I'm just going to call this mobile app. All right, and it's going to install. You'll see this mobile app folder pop up here. And it'll bootstrap and get everything ready for an initial page. So you can see these different files. We've got our application file. Here's a Babel config, right? If you remember when we were talking about how normal React works when it compiles into older versions of ECMAScript, which is the official name for JavaScript, right? It will compile that down. You get these same kind of features all built within Expo. One thing while this is running, I'm going to get a head start on is opening up my simulator. If you don't have a Mac, you can actually run this on your phone through your Wi-Fi network. But I'm going to be developing on this iPhone simulator here.
Yeah, so it's not complete. Expo, if you want to do something without Expo and you want to do it on iOS, you basically need a Mac. Otherwise, if you do it through Expo, you can do this without a Mac. You can develop iOS apps without a Mac, doing what JC is probably going to show you with that QR code thing. Although you're using your simulator because you can, but you guys
Yeah,
will
but
use the
you
same.
guys will see the QR code pop up. So, and you can, if you have an iOS device and you don't have a Mac computer, you can actually connect to your development server here through Expo. So at this point, if we go down into the mobile app folder, you see the node mod is already installed. I can actually say Expo start. And just like if you recall Create React app, how it bootstrapped everything, gave us a initial page to start with, we get these developer tools. This actually pulls up a development server that you can access on port. It'll determine the port for you and open it up in your tab. The port here is 19,002. And then once that gets started, I can actually send this application over to my iOS simulator. And it's a little bit slow the first time opening up, but you should see Expo start up. And if you don't have Expo installed in your simulator, you'll probably get a prompt just asking you to install. But once that's I've already got mine installed. And once that fires up, it'll set up this JavaScript bundle. And then what we should see, you're going to see it on this feedback here, initial on the page, and you'll also see it, this QR code here. If you're not running in a simulator, you can actually, on Android devices, you can scan this QR code, and through your Wi-Fi network, it'll connect you to your simulated output. While this is loading up, let's just see what it's going to show here. So it's not going to be very much. If we look in this, the main entry point here is app.js. All we've got is an app, all right? Now you're going to see a couple different things that are similar to HTML, right? In terms of open and closing tags, but they're going to have different names. They get imported from this library that comes with Expo. It's React Native, and we've got 3 different elements here that they're working with. We've got a style sheet, which is used to define React Native styles, which are they have a lot of overlap with CSS, but they have some of their own definitions. So you're going to notice that styling is definitely a unique experience within React Native. There's a text element that's like your paragraph element, so that's used to contain text. And then you have views, which is essentially like a div, right? So what we should see is we're just going to see a screen with the text called open up app.js to start working on your app, right? And then this is setting the status bar for the app, which is actually up on top. And the auto style just determines whether or not you're in like light or dark mode. But this is all you see right now. So it's not very interesting. Just a blank page, open up app.js to start working on your app, right? One of the neat things here, if you come up to a device and you say shake, if you're running on a real device, you can actually shake it, but I can simulate a shake here. And I can come down and say show element inspector. And you can actually see the different elements just like you were working in the developers tab in a web browser, right? So if you need to work on your margin, your padding, etc., this is how you'll interact and go in and inspect to kind of get those styles just right. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off for now. And we're going to get started just by setting up some scaffolding. So I need to install a couple libraries here. One of the big ones that we're going to use, if you remember, React Router is what we use to determine the different route names, which components got rendered, etc., right? And I was also going in and affecting the URL. A similar one here is called React Navigation. It's going to be at React Navigation /native. So I want to add that. All right, and the next one I'm going to add is going to be React Navigation /stack. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and import these up top. So I need to get a navigation container. And then I also want a stack navigator, and you'll see how all this works together here soon. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a stack. right? And you need, what you want to do is you actually want to wrap your entire application inside of this navigation container. And what that's going to allow us to do is to essentially, if you recall that history.push that we used in React to move between the different parts of the router, it's essentially the React Native equivalent of that. But we wrapped everything before in the browser router, right? In the same case here, we need to wrap everything in this navigation container, right? And it's using the same kind of principles that we did before in terms of our context providers and our consumers. So this is here, and then what I'm going to make now is a stack.navigator. This is essentially like our switch, right? Because inside of our stack navigator, we have different stack screens. Let me create a quick component here. I would call it welcome. We'll move what we had initially here into our welcome. All right, so inside of our, this is like the switch statement, right? And now we're gonna have what's called a stack screen, which is essentially like a route, right? Is what we had before. So you have to name your screen. I'm just gonna call this welcome. And then you provide a component. And in this case, I'm gonna provide a welcome here. On the stack navigator, you want to provide an initial route name. All right. Let's see if this is reflected. So what do we got here? This is the errors that are going to pop up on the simulator. We are unable to resolve, could not be found with the project. Let's try reloading because we did add that. Let's check our package.json. Oh, I see what happened. I added these packages. If I look at my current working directory, I'm in the overall repo here. I needed to go into mobile app to add those. So I'm just gonna go ahead and remove these node modules. We don't want those at this core level up here. And I'll go down into mobile app and I need to run those yarn add commands again. Right, so React Native navigation, and then we want the stack. So if you ever run into a scenario where it looks like you're not getting your imports, one way to verify whether or not they've actually been added to your node modules is always checking this package.json. You'll notice that we're still within that, that node environment, right? You've got your familiar package.json and all the dependencies just get stored right here. So far, right, nothing looks that crazily different than what you saw working in a normal React application, right? Let's see if we're back up and running now. So the bundle's building. All right, we've got another error. Gesture handler could not be found within the project. So I forgot to mention here for React navigation, there's a handful of packages that we actually need to install. So they've got some really good documentation on their docs here for getting started.
Oh, I would completely disagree with React Navigation. React Navigation is probably one of the worst libraries I've ever used in my entire life. I cannot believe how the community has picked it up so quickly. It is awful. It's an awful library. Just awful.
Well, I didn't say the library is good. I'm just saying they have some decent documentation.
I think that's the the primary problem is the documentation falls apart after this getting started page. Someone spent like all their time on this getting started page, and then I could rant for hours about React navigation. It's the worst thing ever.
You think actually just installing the normal packages would already bring in these dependencies as well, right?
You think? Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why it
So
starts here, right? Yeah. That's exactly.
um,
And you're just going to do a simple example. Think about when you like bring in like tab navigation and drawers and all the stacks and everything. Oh, it's a disaster. It's
yeah, we're about to bring in the tabs here in a moment. So just hold on. We got, if you look here, this gesture handler, this is what's missing right now, right? It's looking for this gesture handler, which is what comes with the React navigation stack. Why do you need that? It's because obviously when you're on a phone, you're going to be using your fingers, right, to swipe gestures and whatnot, and it needs to be able to interpret those kind of signals. So let's just make sure we're actually in the right directory again. And we can run expo install. If we copy and paste that, you get React Native gesture handler. We've got React Native reanimated, React Native screens, safe area context, community masked view. All right. So these are all the different packages that they recommend installing in order to use React navigation. All right, let's try reload again. Module app registry is not registered callable module.
when that happens, JC, I stop Metro and restart it. I go back and I shut down the server and just restart.
This is probably one of the tougher things about doing mobile app developments, the fact that you have to work through this simulator server. And so your feedback loop definitely gets bogged down a little bit, right? It feels like you got to wait a little bit longer to actually get things to reload. Sometimes you have to restart your entire simulator. So
It's a bit
it
buggy.
can be frustrating.
Yeah, it can be a bit buggy.
Justin, sorry to interrupt. Going back to what you initially explained, say if we are doing this on Windows system, we won't be having simulator. So we can do this simulation using our iPhone. So to do that, basically we will follow this local host and port address which it will be giving, and just connect it via that.
So you should be able to actually connect here.
Oh, with the QR code.
When you download that Expo application,
Mm-hmm.
it will come with a QR code reader, and then
Okay.
you can read this QR code. Does that make sense?
Okay. And
When you scan it, it should actually open up what you're running here.
oh, okay. And for that, you would require to create an account in Expo. I'm just looking at the Expo app that I have downloaded now, and it says sign in to continue. So you would require to create an account, right?
Correct.
Okay, understand.
All right. So one thing that you'll notice here is this. This looks the same, but we have this little welcome tab up here. This came in because of the Stack Navigator. All right. Now, we don't really need that right now, so I'm going to turn that off. We can do that with a property called screen options. And just say header shown is false. All right, so as soon as that refreshes, that should go away. Okay, so we're all set there. And now the next thing I want to add is I'm going to start adding something. If you look at the way we have our page here and our app, right, we've got our three different menu options, home, vehicles, and account. So what I want to do is actually want to create a tab setup where I've got 3 different tabs, right? And each of them will render the different pages, all right? So it might be helpful. I'm going to pull up front-end React so that we have a reference here, all right? And you notice we have a lib folder. So I'm going to start by making a lib folder inside a mobile app. All right, and in there, I'm going to make a page called main. I'm going to borrow a lot of these imports up here since we'll end up using many of those. Let's see what we want here. All right, so we need to add another package. It's going to be called bottom tabs. This will allow us to make those bottom tab menu options. So yarn add, it's going to be React navigation bottom tabs. And I'm going to create a couple while we're waiting on some of these things to install. So we need bottom tabs. Actually, we need one more package. We want to be able to bring in some icons. Actually, I think those might be installed already. We'll see. All right, let's get started making our main. So this is going to be our main component. And then we are going to create a tab navigator. All right, so I need to import that package for create bottom tab navigator from React navigation bottom tabs. All right. And then we're going to create that navigator here. And then in our main, we're actually going to start by returning tab.navigator. And then this is like this is another thing that's like a switch. And inside of here, we'll have our different screens. So it'll be tab.screen. And say, here's our home screen, right? Provide a component. We don't have a home component yet. We'll also make a vehicles and account, right? Just for placeholders for now, let's come into app here. We'll grab this welcome screen as an example. And I'll make a home. Let's say welcome home. We'll make a vehicle screen real quick as well. And an account screen. We can plug those right in here. Home, vehicles, and account. Now, if you recall looking at, if you're familiar with what a lot of apps do and they have bottom tab navigation, you see a lot of icons, right? So what we want to do is depending upon what screen we go to, be it home, vehicles, or account, we want to render a different icon. So we're going to grab a library called ion icons. So I'll import this here. And this is something that should come from Expo. We'll see if we have to actually install this separately or whether or not it was already installed with Expo. And then in order to render those, we can actually set something up on screen options. So remember how we, on this main app with screen options, we shut off the header on the Stack Navigator. So similarly on the Tab Navigator, we can update the screen options as well. So what we'll do is we're actually going to pass back a callback. And this is actually going to be run depending upon what route you're on, which will allow us to update the screen options per screen. All right, so this callback, every time you switch screens, it gets called and evaluated, and it'll set this tab bar icon option. So we want to know, we have focused, color, and size. All right, this is the information that we're going to get in the callback. So I'll start by creating a variable called icon name. And set up a prefix here. So the prefix is because the icon names are actually different depending upon what platform we're running on. So we actually need to come up here and we need to grab what's called a constants from, this would be from React Native. So React Native can actually determine exactly what platform it's running on. So we look up here for text and view, we should be able to import platform. And then so we'll default it, MD is for Android. And then if we happen to find that the platform is iOS, then we will switch it to iOS here. So we can just say if platform.os is equal to iOS, we'll set the prefix. All right, now here's where the fun starts. So we can check we know what route we're coming in on, if it's homes, vehicles, or account, and we can check its name. So if route.name happens to be home, our icon name is going to equal home. Now there is, let me bring up a link for you guys. There's a page here called icons.expo.fyi where you can search all kinds of icons that they have available, right? Now we're using ion icons, so these ion icon ones are the ones we're restricted to. And you'll see this prefix MD, right? What you should also see is an iOS-home, right? So the icons will be slightly different rendered depending upon what platform you're on. So that's how you go through that, that library and you pick out the icons you want. So we'll have a home icon if you're home. And then if the route name happens to be vehicles, we'll set the icon name depending upon its focus. If it's focused, it means that that's the one that you've selected, right? That's the current page that you're on. We can actually change the icon a little bit. So if it is focused, we'll use list box. Otherwise, we'll use list. And if it's account, we'll use the person icon name. And then now what we need to do is we need to set up that prefix. Dash and then the icon name here. So what are we going to return? We're actually going to return this ion icons. And that's going to get set here at the tab bar icon option. So size, set it the size that we got, rose color. All right. Now that's not the only thing we want. So we've got our screen options right here. Go to the other end. We also want to set some tab bar options. I'll set a property called active tint color. This is going to be our the blue that we were using before. Right, this is like our navy blue. And then if they're inactive, we'll just set it to gray. All right. Now, we're not really doing anything with this quite yet, right? We need to export it, and then we need to import it into that main app. Come back up here. And the reason, this may seem like a lot of boilerplate, and it is at the moment. The reason that I'm setting up this, this scaffolding at the moment is so that when we add our login page and whatnot, we don't have to refactor a bunch of our code. So we should be able to come in here. I'm going to move our styles actually all the way to the top of the page so we don't forget about them. And I'm going to import that main component. Lib name, right? And I'll set up there's another switch here on the app, set up the name, and then I'll set the initial route name command as well. All right, unable to resolve module. So it looks like we got a problem here. And it's because I didn't actually put the full name. So it goes lib main, and then the name of the file is main.js. All right, so there you see it. So this welcome home is stuffed all the way up here up top. There's a way we can fix that pretty easily.
You use the safe area component. So this is one of the things that gets frustrating about mobile development is there's things known as safe areas, and on different platforms the safe areas are different, right? Because if those of you who have an iPhone know that there's the time and the very top bar, right, that never goes away. But then there's Android too, which is a little bit different. So it's 24 pixels versus like 32 pixels or something. And so typically you make decisions one way or another, but there is a component called Safe Area that Expo provides that is basically just a view, but it specifically is platform switching, depending upon that. I don't think JCO use that right now, but you can use that, and it will automatically kind of manage that for you.
Yeah, we're going to be bringing that in actually here in a little bit. Once we set up our vehicles page, we need to do it so that we can make sure that our cards, just to reiterate, would be just saying that safe area, depending upon what phone you're on, this area for the status bar up here can change. And you can even have phones that have bizarre shapes and whatnot, where they dip down a bit up here for the speaker and whatnot. And so the library can detect essentially how much margin it needs to put between what it renders for your application as being the top, right? Because you see this welcome home got stuffed up and overlaid with content in the status bar that you don't want, and in your app, right? So it helps prevent that without you having to go and write in special logic to handle every different model, every different phone, right? Which is definitely one of the challenges that you get when you start making mobile apps, right? So you could spend a lot of time making a mobile app. It'll work great on your specific phone, and then the moment that other people start downloading it, they have problems, right? And so that's yet another thing that's really nice about using libraries like Expos. They come with a lot of different tools and libraries that help you, I guess, essentially commonize your code and handle those differences. But this is just, I'm putting a style tag in here. This is some inline styles that should help center these different pages. All right, so our welcome host center here. I come to the vehicles tab. I got my vehicles screen, and then here in the account. So we're getting there, right? We've got our different tabs, just like we've got our different menu items on our web application. All right. So now what I want to do, I'm going to save this work. Tab navigator. And then we're going to move these home, vehicle, and account components into their own screens or their own files. So let's come back up here. This is mobile app. And I'm going to make a folder called screens, right? And if you recall, in our React Native application, we had this split up into an account screen, right? So we've got account here. I'm going to make another one and call it vehicles. Make another one and call it home. And then just to get one step ahead, I'll make a login folder as well. All right, so those are our 4 different screens. Now we just need to make the files. I'll call this account.js, home.js, login.js, and then vehicles.js. So we should be able to come over here into main, just crib what we have for home. We're going to have to update the imports, right? Because this doesn't have React Native imported. I'll clean up a couple of the other imports, and then we have to export this. And I can copy and paste this in. Since we didn't really do much for other pages, we just need to change the names for now. These are just placeholders. And then the same thing for vehicles. All right, so now I can go back into my main screen and start importing these. Comment these out since we're going to go ahead and import them. All right, let's make sure we didn't break anything. So it's not looking real good right now. Unable to resolve module. All right, why might that be? So I did my export. Is this not where we think it is? Oh, yeah, it is. It isn't because we're in main is in a folder, so we actually need to go up 2 levels, right? To the parent of our parent. Try to reload that. So this should look just like it did, right? Functionally, we haven't changed anything, but we just kind of tucked away these different screens into their own files. That way we can focus in on each one of them as we build them up. All right, so I'm gonna get started here on the home screen. Just to save some time for you guys, because I don't want to necessarily go down a rabbit hole. I'm actually going to copy and paste some styles in here. So let's talk about this. So in our home screen, and you'll see this for a lot of the different screens, when you set up styles, it's not necessarily styles that are stored in a CSS or a module.css file. We use this style sheet that gets imported from React Native, and then we call the create function and pass in a JavaScript object. And in that, the keys of this JavaScript object are different, what you can interpret as CSS styles. But there are slight differences, right? So what we have here, we're gonna make a card for home, right? And it's some of the stuff that you saw before. It's got some padding. We're gonna put a shadow around the card. Then we're gonna have a header, and we're gonna have a content container, right? So what do we wanna show here on just a reference? For home, we want our header, and then we want these little list items, right? So let's go ahead and we're gonna make another library component to render these list items. So inside a library, I need to go back up one level here. Here's lib, right? I'll go into lib, and I'll make a folder called list items. All right, so if I open this up, and then I just want to make a file called list item. Now I'm making this here because I know that I'm already going to end up reusing this in other places. All right, so as a starting point, we can take what we've got from our home screen, copy and paste this in. All right, and I'm just going to call this here a list item. All right, so the styles in this list item are going to be pretty simple. It's just going to be an item container. And I just want to update the margin bottom. All right. Now the list item itself is going to be wrapped in a view. To use these styles, you use the style prop on any of your React Native elements, right? And then you just pass in the name of your style sheet, in our case is styles, and then the name of the property, so item container. Now for this item container, if we go back here, we want to have a title, right? In our case, it would be a label, right? And then our content or a text. So this here is going to be what we're going to have for our title. And I'm just going to use some inline style here, make it bold. And we're going to pull everything in off of props. If you guys remember props, those get passed down when you use the component. And I'll have a label, and then I'll have text in here, right? And so here, what we want to render bold is going to be our label. And then we want another text element. Or sorry, we actually don't need that. We'll just render the text right here. All right. So this should help save us some time when we go to make each of these line items. All right. So in our home, we're going to import a list item. Does anybody have any questions, by the way? I know I'm going a little bit fast, but it's just because we're trying to rebuild essentially everything that we did in that web application. We'll be rebuilding on the mobile side tonight. All right.
It is interesting how much you can reuse what you essentially had originally done. I mean, it takes some modifying.
That's one of the powers of React Native. And while you do suffer a slight performance hit and some restrictions, particularly when you talk about animations and things, really edge cases, but animations, navigation, some of the more cutting edge modules in native development, you do miss out on that sometimes. Sometimes, very rarely do you, but sometimes you do. But you make up for it in maintenance costs as well as reuse costs, as you can see here. In fact, I just had that conversation with an enterprise client today, and they're trying to decide whether to go full native, meaning both Android and iOS full native with the languages, or use React Native, or use a web view inside of it, because you could also just have a little web browser component. It's just a single component called WebView, and then all you do is you give it the URL of your front end. And as long as your front end is responsive, it will actually look like a mobile app, which we do quite frequently if we need to get something really fast. And so it looks mobile, it behaves mobile. You'll never notice a difference until the performance starts to hit. But and you get restrictions on phone integrations and native integrations like Bluetooth and navigation and stuff like that. But if that works, there's so many different options, and yeah, it's a tough decision. But I usually push people to go React Native because of the shareable resources, not only code, but human resources too, human capital, because you can get the same developers who do your front end stuff to also develop potentially your mobile app without too much pain and suffering. So getting talent's a lot easier to maintain that going forward, particularly for a large company.
Yeah, and you can tell, I mean, there's like subtle differences here, but I mean, if you are comfortable with React and making a React application on the web, it will not take you very long to adapt and be making mobile applications with React Native, right? You have to learn some of the libraries and different things that are available for React Native and nuances there, but the core, right, the actual framework itself behaves in the same way. So I guess we'll get started finishing this up. We want to put a header in, and then we want to list these different items, right? And we don't have data yet, so I'm just going to make up some data. We've got our view here, which centered everything, right? Now we want to add in our container card. So just set this style here equal to styles.card. We'll have a text component here. It's going to say home. This is going to be our header. Right? And then we'll have, if you look up here, we've got our card, our header, and then our content container. So we'll have another view. And this one here will be our content container. Right? And then in each of them, now we're ready to use our list items. So it's going to have a title, or sorry, it's going to have a label. That one's user. This should be a self-closing tag since I don't need to close anything in that, right? And then if you remember, when we set this up, we have a label, and then we have text, right? And our text, this would be our first and last name, right? So let's see how this looks right now. All right, so you can see our card already starting to come together. It looks like on our list item, we want a little bit of space there in between this colon, right? So I have a space right here. And then let's add our other item. So email. Add last report. Inventory size. Vehicle makes, and then model years. All right. Comparing these two, so we've got user. I made a separate one for email since I know this is a smaller screen. It's going to get a bit crowded. Our last report, we've got inventory size, vehicle makes, and model year. So that card, it's already set up. We just need to get the data. So let's, the next one we want to set up, we'll set up the account one since it's similar. It's actually even simpler, right? Save our progress. All right, we're gonna copy and paste this guy over for account. And so we know it's gonna use a lot of the same content, right? We just need to change the name here. Now, if we look at account, it should just show the same thing, right? I'm just gonna have home. So we want to update this here to account. And then referencing what we've got on a web application, we got first name, last name, email, and account created. So first name, last name, email, and then account created. So that's just about there. It should be user account. We want to keep it consistent. And what we're missing here is a logout button, right? So that should probably go here in our library, right? I'll make a folder called buttons. And we could use, there's actually buttons available from React Native, just like with these view components and text. But if we want to have a consistent presentation of the buttons independent of a platform, we actually we need to roll our own. That's what we're going to do here. I'll just call this a submit button. So we want to import React. And there's a couple things we need. So we're going to have text. We're going to have a component called touchable opacity. Style sheet, just like with the other ones. All right. And then what we return, we'll export default. We need to have an on press that we implement, since that's what buttons use. They don't have on click. In this case, it's on press. And then our submit button will also have a title that's going to get passed down through props. So it uses touchable opacity. The on press gets passed on to its prop. We'll just leave this blank for now. All right, and then the text that goes inside of it. And that's where we'll put the title. All right, and then similar before, I'm gonna copy and paste this these styles in here. Save us some time. All right, and touchable opacity, that's gonna get the submit button container style. text is going to get the submit button text style. All right, so let's just look at these real quick. The submit button container is going to be that navy blue, right? We want the font inside to be white. The font size is going to end up being 16. It's going to be bold. We want the button itself to take up 90% of its container. Put a little bit of padding on the inside, and just overall make a similar button to what we have here. The difference is we're going to make it take up the width. That way, it's a little bit easier for somebody on a phone to press. So what we need to do now is come back down to our screen. So we'll open up it's the account screen, right? And we want to import this submit button. All right. Now what I want to do down here, I want to come under the card. I'm not going to put it inside the card like here. I'll actually put this button underneath the card. And I'll wrap it up in its own view. I'll put the submit button right here. So the title is going to be log out, since that's what we've got right here, right? And then I'm going to make a function called handle log out. We'll just console log out for now. So the on press handler, we'll just use that there. Log out. We can close this. We don't actually need the second part. Let's see what we got here. So default, nothing was returned from render. Looks like we might have a problem with the submit button. All right, so you look here, I wasn't actually returning anything. These functional components, they need to return the JSX. Let's try it now. All right, so we got log out, but we want this thing to open up. Well, I thought if you look at the styles in here for the submit button, it's supposed to be taking up 90%. Remember what I mentioned before, if we turn on the element inspector, what do we got here? It looks like it is taking up the majority of its width, right? What it is that view is collapsed around it, so we need to expand that view. So I'm just going to put some inline styles in here and set this width to 90%. That should take care of it. All right, there we go. So I press log out here. We look in the screen. You can see it console log and log out, right? So there's our feedback. And as a matter of fact, let's make this submit button just a little bit taller. So let's check out its height. Maybe make it, say, 30 pixels. Nope. Let's make it 50. There we go. That'll be a little bit easier. Okay, so we've got our account screen, our home, and our vehicles. Now, it doesn't really make much sense to render our vehicle screen until we have some vehicles to look at. So we're at a point where we can actually start implementing our login process. All right, and it's going to be very similar to what we had before, and we're going to hook this up to our production backend. All right. So remember how I made that separate folder for login. Now's the point where we'll go ahead and we'll start, I'll copy and paste from home, and we'll start building our login form. Now, I've got a lot of styles that I'm going to bring down here. For this login form. Just take a look through these. So we'll have a login card. The form itself will have a header. We've got a container for the form. The form has fields, there's labels, inputs, and that should be about everything that we had for our React Native form. If you remember, I come back here into front-end React. If we look at our login screen, right, we had our card, our form container header, right, form field. There's some things that are different. Like one of the things I mentioned, you can't take CSS one-to-one between the web and React Native. React Native doesn't support this grid display, which makes some stuff a little bit challenging. And then if we look at our login, let's just do a little bit of a comparison here. We've got an outer div, which is our login card, right? We had a form header. We've got our form container, and here's our form. And then inside of our form, we've got different form fields. So we had an email, right? And there's our input. And then we had a password, right? And at the very bottom, we had our sign-in button. So we kind of want to capture the same essence in our mobile app login screen, right? So I'm going to clear all this out, and we'll start from the top. Right, that outer view, that's going to be our login card. And then we'll have our text. This one's going to represent our form header. All right, let's log out here just to reference this thing. FSSE app login, we've got our label and our field. Before I go too far, let's actually update the initial guy here. Instead of this welcome, we're going to render our login component so we can see it while we make it. Get rid of this welcome because we don't need that anymore. And our initial route name is going to be login. So get rid of this. Just take a look. So looks like we need to shake it. Try to reload the app, and it should take us there. All right, we've got our header, FSSE app login. Now we just need to add the email, password, and sign-in buttons. All right. So we want to add another view here. This is going to be our form container. We'll have another view to represent the actual form. Remember, that was its own element. If we go back, I'm going to pull up this login screen again. If you look at the way this was set up, each form field, which is comprised of a label and an input, got wrapped in its own div, which we gave a class name of form field. And that's what we're doing with this view here. So this view, I'm going to label it as a form field, right? And then in that, we don't have labels, all right? So we actually need to have a text input to represent the label. We'll put email here. And then this is going to be our form input. We need to import a new thing from React Native, which is going to be called a text input, right? That's going to capture our text. Just like before, it's going to have a placeholder. User is at example.com. I'm going to set auto capitalize, go to none, because these, by default, these text inputs end up capitalizing the first thing that you provide. And the text content type, I'll set to email address. All right, so there's our email field, right? And now we want to add password as well. And copy and paste. Is there a question? We'll add password, a placeholder here. We'll just say enter your password. The text content type is going to be password. All right. See that guy down there? We want to use the submit button that we made before, just like we did on the log out screen. And we'll put this underneath. So I'm coming down here all the way underneath this form container, right? I'll add the submit button in. So title is going to be sign in, right? And then on press, I'll just put a little function here and say sign in. All right. Check this out. All right, so we've got our sign in page. And when I press it, I should see some logs coming in on the screen. All right, tell me I'm trying to sign in, right? But if you guys remember, looking back at this login screen, there's a lot more going on here. We had this on change handler, we were setting an email, we linked it up to the state of the component, right? So we need to actually do the exact same thing here. So I'm actually gonna copy and paste some code. We're gonna go up here, right? We're gonna use state from React. And then here inside the component, we can set those up, right? So this is where it even starts shining. You can see I'm copy and pasting directly from our web application, and I'll set those in here. So I've got for the value, this will be linked to the email, right? And then on this one, it's called on change text. We just set that equal to set email. And then we just need essentially the same thing down here for password. And then we're going to want to have a, let's see what we called it in our original login, our handle submit, right? I'll copy and paste that one as well. So we don't have this API library yet, but we're going to bring it into our mobile application. We don't need to do this prevent default because it's not a A tag, right? Like you'd have in the web. And instead of using this on press, I'll provide the handle submit. And what we'll do, let's just on submit, let's just console log the current value, the email, and the password. And so my email at example.com, and then put in a password. Now, if you look here, we're going to want to fix that because you don't obviously want to show a password while somebody's typing it. But you can see right there on sign in, it triggered handle submit, and we're successfully capturing the email and the password from that form, right? Or forget, just come down here. What we need to set is a there's a property called secure text entry. We just set that to true. Once this reloads, you can see it's all masked. All right. So now that we're at this point, it looks like we want to have our API library again, right, to be able to post and get and whatnot. And what we can do is we can copy and paste what we had before. So if you look back at our React front end, we had a utils, and that's where we provided a API.js. So I'm literally going to copy this guy. All right. And under mobile app, I'm going to make a utils folder, same structure. And I'm going to paste API.json in here, all right? We're going to make a couple differences. One thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a configuration folder to contain those URLs, because we're going to need them in other places as well. And I'll make a file called config.js. And then inside of that config.js, we want to include both the REST API URL as well as MQTT. I'll make a object called config. This will be, if we look back at the way this is set up here, we want API base URL. Anybody remember what this URL is? This is going to be for the REST backend. It's the one we just updated a bunch of clients and whatnot to last week, and as well on Tuesday. So this one's going to be, sorry, go ahead.
api.fsse.com.
Yep. And it will, did you say FSSE?
Full stack SE.
Oh,
Yep.
full stack. Yeah.
So api.fullstackse, our domain that we own, fullstackse.com, right? The API subdomain. That's the base URL for that. And then we also need a URL for WebSockets, which is how we access the MQTT broker, right? And that one is going to be WSS for secure WebSockets. It's WebSocket -MQTT, and then our same domain, fullstackse.com, right? So we don't have this process.env here in a mobile application, right? Since that's going to be running a node. This is running on like it's going to be compiled into our mobile app, but I'm going to access it through that config file. And sorry, I actually forgot to export that config. And so in here, let's go ahead and import it. All right, and then API base URL as well as WS. That can get destructured off of this config. All right, we don't actually need that here. It's not being used, so just the API base URL. Now let's review what this file really is. I just copy and paste this really fast from our other React application, but this implements our HTTP GET to a REST API, right? You provide the route here and any headers like your token, et cetera, if you need it. And the same thing here. So we've got our GET, And then we've got our post that uses HTTP post. And this is the one that we're going to use in order to accomplish our login here. So we need to import that. And now we can uncomment this. So what do we need to change? This looks the same. All right. Set user, set token, set is authenticated. I'm going to comment those out, since, as you remember, those are all coming from context, which is what we'll bring in next. We don't need this redirect anymore. What we do need, though, is something that's like this history push, because what we want to do is, if it is a successful login, that's when we want to go to the main part of the app that has your home page, your vehicles page, as well as the account, right? But how do you do that in this context? Well, if we come back here to app, we have our navigation container, right? Our stack navigator, and then 2 different screens available. We've got our main, which includes the 3 different tabs, right, with its subscreens. And then we've got login. Now, something that isn't quite obvious, but once you read through and circle through the docs a little bit with React Navigation, you'll find out that once a component is chosen, right, from the stack, it gets past a navigation reference on its props. And you can use that reference to choose to navigate to anywhere else on that stack, all right? So what we have here actually on props is something called navigation. So I'm actually going to destructure that off of props. And then instead of history.push, I'll have navigation.navigate. And we want to go to main. So when we go to main, what we're saying is we want to go to this stack screen, right? And then if it's a successful login, you also, after the attempt, you want to reset that email and password so they don't stay in the fields, right? And get rid of this history.push. All right. So this is all hooked up. Let's give it a shot. Let's see. So this is going to be wrong. Let's see if it says there was a login error. Let's try it. Network request failed. There was a login error. All right, let's try it with a correct username and password. Say we'll use the Lorem Ipsum account. One, two, three. All right, so it looks like that failed as well. Let's make sure that our post here, api.post, is actually getting the proper URL. All right, so this is the one we're hitting here. I'm just going to console log post and then check out the URL. So you see here, it's going to localhost 9500. It's because I made the mistake of updating the API.js from our old front end repository. I didn't update the one that's actually in our mobile app. We should have configuration here. All right. Let's try it now. from ipsum@example.com. There we go. You see how it made its way out? Now we can use that exact same navigator to implement this logout behavior. Right? So let's actually open up our logout screen. I'm going to get rid of these console logs since we know that's working. Right? If we look here, the URL is going to api.fullstackse.com. We'll go and open up our account screen that has a logout button. And on its props, it gets that navigation handle as well. So I can destructure navigation off of that. And in this handle logout, instead of saying logout, I'll actually, or in addition to, I'll say navigation.navigate. And where do you guys think we should navigate to if you press logout?
Back to the login screen.
Exactly. So all we have to do is put the name of the screen in, and it should navigate through that stack. There we go. All right. So we're starting to get this flow in place. But what we haven't added is any memory of when you go from the screen. We don't have any memory of what the token was, what the user was, etc. So I'm going to save this in Git real quick, and we'll start adding in our context. So login screen. And just like before, we've got this context here, right? Let me come up and undo the changes that were made before. This was modified here, so I'm going to say git. If you look at the comments, you can say git restore. That way, when this gets pushed up, I haven't broken anything. All right. We don't need this package.json or this yarn.lock that's here either. That was from where I ran a yarn ad in the wrong location. The only change we should see in this overall repo today is in this mobile app. And I also actually made a mistake here. If you look inside, whenever you run expo init, it generates your own Git repository. We don't need that particular one. I'm going to use the one that contains all of our different applications. So I do a git add, and I'm going to commit this. This is our mobile application. All right. So back to our React front end for a web, we had 3 different contexts, right? Our auth, user, and our vehicle context. Okay. So what I'm going to do here, mobile app, I'll make a context folder as well. And I'm actually just going to copy and paste those in. We've got here's our auth, our user, and vehicle. All right, we don't need to worry about vehicle yet because we want to do we'll have to set up the actual request for the vehicles and the vehicle data, etc. Before we can use that vehicle context, but we can already use the auth context. Now, if you recall, this use state, we were using the local storage from the browser, right? We don't want to worry about that quite yet. So I'm just going to comment out this section of the code. We'll get there later, all right? And for the auth context, we just want this is authenticated. We want to default it to false. And then we also want our token and set token. All right, and its default value is just an empty string. That's for the token, all right? And then is authenticated is just a Boolean. We provide those in the auth context. We'll do the same thing for the user context. So I'll comment this out for now that uses the local storage. There's something that's similar within mobile app called async storage. And we will actually set up a library to replicate the API as close as we can with the set item and get item. That way we can more or less reuse a lot of this code here. So the user default value is just an empty object, right? The user and set user gets passed down. Now, if you remember, with these providers, what we need to do is we actually need to wrap the entire application or the application where we want it inside of those providers, right? So I'm going to import these providers. I'm going to get rid of these styles here. We don't need them in the main app since all our styles get contained. Let's go ahead and import those providers. So auth context from context as well as user. And sorry, this is auth context provider. It's the provider because if you look in these files here, we export by default the auth context provider, right? And then the auth context itself is exported separately. And then what we can do is we can actually wrap this entire application in the providers. Same thing for user. Now I have a typo here. It should be user context. All right. So now anything underneath it here can use context and reference those. So, I mean, you can already see, I mean, this is really, really similar to the way that we treated context. It's almost identical to the way we treated context in the React app. The only difference is right now we aren't using local storage. That's it, right? So let's go back in. We're going to come into our login screen again. And now we can actually use this set user, set token, set is authenticated, right? We need to come up here and import that context. So we'll use the use context hook, right? And then I want to import auth context from right? And I also want to import the user context. And we can use that hook and bring those out. Here's our auth context. So we'll get this set is authenticated. Right? And then for the user context, we want set user. And we get the set token from our auth context as well. So upon a successful login, we just want to go ahead and set those. And that'll make that information available to our other routes, right? Now, one of the things that we can already do, let's go to our account page. Once we come into our account page, we want to be able to bring in that account information, right? So let's import our user context here. Need the use context hook. I'm in the account page right now, and I can grab user right off of that hook. Right? So this text will be user.firstname, right? user.lastname, user.email, and I believe it's user.created. Right? Let's see if that works. Undefined is not an object. Let's see where we broke this. This is at login. All right. Oh, so I imported these incorrectly. These need to be destructured because they're exported as constants. All right. If you look at the way the context is defined, the default is the provider. You have to destructure to grab the actual context itself. It'll be the same thing for the account page. All right. Let's check out our lorem ipsum account. Sign in, and then if we go home to account, there we go. That's the user information. We got our first, last name, our email, and then when the account was created, which was on September 4th. All right. Now what we can do is we can actually start bringing in some of this information from home, but these last report and everything, that's where we need to set up our vehicle request, right? And a good place to do that will actually be our main component, since it will be the first thing that get mounted before any of these other screens come in. So we know that that data is available on all the screens. So I'm going to come in here to main. All right. And what I want to do is I actually want to import the API library. That way I can do a GET request. What else are we going to need? To do the vehicle's GET request, you actually need authentication. So we need the token. We'll want to import the auth context, right? And then let's come back up here, referencing our front-end React. If you remember, we had a route called a private route that we used. And it's what went ahead and did this vehicle's request there. So let's actually copy and paste this in here. Let's use effect. We'll bring that into our main component. And we don't have use effect imported right now from React, so we need to import that. There's our use effect hook. Okay, so we've got on component mount. API, it's going to get vehicles. We need the token. So not only do we need use effect, we also need use context. And I'm going to grab that off of the auth context. Let's look through here. Let's keep looking. So we're going to do a get to vehicles. We get a list of all the vehicles, right? We're going to do a get for latest data. If you remember on Tuesday when we were hooking up MQTT, we saw these latest data requests coming in. That's where in an initial mount, it's getting that latest data through the REST API, right? And it uses the token as well because that requires authentication. And then what we want to do is we want to set vehicle data and set vehicle list. So we need to prep the vehicle context now, right? So here's the vehicle context, similar to before. I'm just going to comment out these sections that work with the local storage and prime these use state hooks with an empty array for the vehicle list. And then for vehicle data, it'll be an empty object. That's just our initial value. Right, so that vehicle context provider is ready. However, we never set up the provider itself, right? Now, if you remember the way we did it before, we provided the vehicle context provider in a private route, right? We had this private route here where we would redirect if somebody wasn't authenticated, right? But if they made it through, then we would wrap that route in a vehicle context provider and in such that it could access the vehicle context. So we're a little bit ahead of ourselves in that we want to be able to set vehicle data and set vehicle list, but we can't yet because we don't have a vehicle provider there. So what we're going to do in this case, and we didn't set up a private route just because the React navigation library is a little bit different. I'm going to use what's called a higher order component, which is what we saw in that private route here with this with vehicle data, right? So we're going to make a higher order component called with privacy. So I'll make another folder here called HOC. It's a common acronym for higher order components. All right. And inside of this HOC, HOCS for higher order components, right? I'm going to make one called with privacy. Let's just copy and paste this into our with privacy higher order components. We want, let's see what we want. React, we want to be able to use context. And that should be about it. So let's start it off. It's a functional component. We can export it. We'll call it with privacy. And it takes as its argument a component. All right. And then what it's going to do is it's actually going to return itself a functional. It's going to return a function. So it's a function that's going to return a functional component, right? And here's where I need to access whether or not we're authenticated. So I'm going to use context. And what we need here is we need the, this would be the auth context, right? So we need to import that. And then what we want from the auth context is authenticated. I'll grab navigation off of props. So what we're going to do here is if you're not authenticated, I'm actually going to send you back to the login screen. All right. So if it's not authenticated, we'll use navigation to navigate to login. Now, why do I know that this navigation is going to be available? It's because I intentionally am only going to use this with privacy higher order component within the stack.navigator. All right. And then what we'll do is we actually, if you do pass this, if you don't get sent back to the login screen, I'm going to wrap this component with a vehicle context provider. Sorry, I need to go up 2 levels because we're inside of, or are we not? HOC, no, we're good, just one. And our context name is vehicle context. All right, so what we'll return here is going to be the vehicle context provider tag. And then this is where we'll render the component. But we also need to be able to pass through props. So besides navigation, I'm going to grab, I believe it was, yeah, other props there. We want to pass that into component. All right. And then where we're going to use this, if we come back to this main app, we want to wrap our main in with privacy. And then everything under main, we know we'll have access to a vehicle context provider, right? So I can import with privacy from our higher components with privacy here. And I call it before rendering main there. So we know that once it switches to main, it'll call that with privacy. With privacy has access to the auth context because everything is wrapped in the auth context. And then what it will do is if you are authenticated, it will wrap everything underneath of it with the vehicle context provider. So now we know we do have our vehicle context provider, right? And if you look here, let's just test this out real quick. Form.ipsum. We'll do a successful login. So we got an error here. Cannot find variable. I may have spelled this wrong. Nope. Let's try again. This should fail because I didn't really change anything. So it's that with privacy at 18. Is anybody seeing where I may have messed up here? You can see we're getting sent back to that login page every time now, right? Let's go ahead and look at this vehicle context provider. Can't find variable, is authenticated. Hmm.
Can you console log the is authenticated?
What's that?
Can you console log the is authenticated?
Yeah, it's odd because it's as soon as this is getting called here, right?
Mhm.
And auth context, if you look, it's definitely located within the auth context provider. Let's put some console logs in here. We can see if we get a reference to this is authenticated. So is authenticated true? It does have access, but what I'm seeing here, it's interesting, is there's a login error. Right, so that's after our login screen. So let's go back. Let's actually go to our login screen. One thing I'm going to try here. You know you know what it is? I didn't pass navigation down. I need to pass props along with navigation here. I think that might be it.
Yeah, you can also do a use navigation, which comes with React navigation. It provides its own context.
Can't find variable. It's very odd. I just had this working today.
Yeah,
And it looks like, yeah,
It's not pointing to the wrong file, is it? Like to the wrong variable? Like it's not pointing to the other one in the front end, is it? I thought when I was trying to look and see, I think your context goes up the one, and I think that's okay. I'm just wondering if there was in the other file.
oh, like what I had before where I changed the API.
Yeah, or that this one wasn't going to that it wasn't going to, that it was trying to go back to the original one rather than this one, but I couldn't tell. This one looks okay to me because you've only got it going up the one.
Yeah, the thing I find interesting here is this, like the fact that it's saying there was a login error, right?
where do you do that at? Where is that? There's a login error. Because that's
So
what
that's actually here. That's here in the login screen, and that only happens if there's an error here, right? So the then statement's the only thing that navigates to main.
Can you console log the error there?
Yeah, but it doesn't. The thing is, I wonder if there's another place in here that we're console logging there was a login error, because there was a good bit of copy and paste that happened here.
Yeah, that because it looks like what I'd be interested in is it's catching an error, so there's some error in there. So it may not actually ever be getting, so maybe a red herring.
So let's go into our screens. So we have it in the login screen. It's not in the lib. Yeah, it's the only place where we actually do this login, this error. All right, let's see what we get this time. That's it.
So it says can't find variable is authenticated.
Correct. And it's erroring here. I'm wondering if it's this navigation call that's actually throwing the error. Let's get rid of that for the moment, right? And just not navigate and see if it still says there was a login error. I guess I should probably provide some kind of success, right? So we'll just log the result. Yeah, so the login actually is successful. You can see we're getting the token, right? Token expires fills the user object, so all that's good. So the error
So
that's
It's
Yeah, I see
catching the is authenticated error and returning that. Because you console log the error and it's showing in the log.
right, the error happens as a result of this navigate to main, right?
Yeah, so I don't think, yeah, I don't think that what I said before, I think it's a red herring, but I think we're looking at that. I think it's probably an issue in your context. So go back to the actual main, because I bet it's failing there, and it's not even getting to a point of rendering the page. So it's throwing
Oh,
error,
good call.
but it's, yeah, so it's,
I think it is the main page because we started adding some stuff here, right? And this is what it is. This is authenticated.
that's what
But
I'm thinking. So console
so
log that, because you didn't, oh, you didn't bring it out. There you go.
no, it's because it's not. It's because it's trying to go to main, right? And this is authenticated was never brought out.
Yeah, but it was throwing, so it truly was a misdirection on an error message because it was saying it was in the login, but it really wasn't. It was failing on the navigation because it was navigating, but then throwing the error on trying to navigate because it never rendered, so it never really reported it correctly.
Yeah, that's a tough error to find. So if anybody followed what happened there, let's get this thing fixed, and then I'll be able to tell you with more confidence of what happened here, right? So we need to bring in the vehicle context. And what we want to bring in from the vehicle context are some of its setter methods. So we want the set vehicle data and then set vehicle list. It's all happened because I copy and pasted a bunch of code that was anticipating us having this context in here already. So let's check this out now. Now what we do need to do is we need to bring back this navigation, get rid of this comment here, right? All right. not very exciting, but we made it through, right? There's no error now. So what happened was, like BJ mentioned, the error was in this main.js, and it's because what we were seeing, exactly what we were seeing, this is authenticated was not defined, right? It wasn't brought in. But it was weird because we were seeing this, there was a login error message. And why was that? It's because as a result of trying to navigate to main, there was an error. So this call here on line 80 threw an error inside of it then, which went to the catch. Does that make sense? So there was an error being thrown, but we just had a hard time digging through the actual error messages to see that it was being generated in this main.js file. And I think that's one of the big challenges that you'll run into working with these frameworks sometimes, is there's so many layers that it can be a challenge to figure out where your error is being generated. All right, but good news is we're in main and we actually do have access to this vehicle context, right? And just as just to show you guys, I'm going to console log the vehicle list. And then in that is privacy, let's get rid of those logs that we don't need anymore. I'll log out and log back in. All right. And then what do we see here? This is our full vehicle list. We've got our model, right? Image URL, the name, right? Here's Detroit. Here's Tokyo, all of them. So what we can do now is we can actually start to use that that information, right, in our different screens. So let's come down here. Let's start off with the home screen. Now, if you guys remember, we added a ton of different helper functions to try to like process data and whatnot from the vehicle. So I'm going to import the vehicle context. And we're going to actually calculate these things, our last report, our inventory size, vehicle makes, etc. We want our use context hook. And I'm going to close the rest of the tabs here and go up to, let's reference our React front end and look at our home screen. Right? So we need user context, and we have that already. But we also want the vehicle list and vehicle data. Let's grab our user context. And a lot of this should actually just be copy paste. So I'm going to go through from here, right, to where we pull this stuff in from our context, and I'm going to grab all of these helper functions: get last vehicle report, get make list, and get year range. But since the data, right, the data shouldn't be any different, so we should be able to copy and paste that right in. All right, so check here, right, vehicle data is coming in. We go through, calculate the greatest timestamp, make sure the UID exists, etc., and set up the text correspondingly. We've got get make list and get year range, right? So here we can render user.firstname and user.lastname. This will be our user.email, right? And then that's our get last vehicle report, and we want to pass the vehicle data into it. Our inventory size, that's just the vehicle list.length, right? the number of vehicle makes. We got a function for that. Or get make list. And then get year range. Can't find variable moment. So if we look back in here, to reference that from now, remember that last report text there? We want to know how many minutes, how many hours, how many days from today was the last time something reported. We use that moment library. So what we need to do is actually download that thing, right? Let's go back up into the bank. Let's find our base directory here. So it's called mobile app. And then I'm going to say yarn add moment. Sorry, I must have pressed grab some utilities that we don't need. Let's go ahead and read. We're going to restart Expo. So the Metro bundler just started back up. We should see the JavaScript build. Pull it open right here. We're going to run this thing in the iOS simulator. I'll tell us to reload. So now once we log in, we should not only have the user information, but we should also have a summary of our entire fleet. It says it still can't find it. Why is that? It's because we didn't import it. So I need to import moment. Try to reload. There we go. Last report. 2029 Chevy Bolt, 10 hours ago. Inventory size is 7. Here's our makes, right? So you can tell we have access to that vehicle context. We don't have our vehicle cards built yet, but the data's here, okay? So the next thing we need to do is set up this list of our vehicle cards. I'm gonna save here. Say add vehicle context.
JC, do you want to give us like a 5-minute rest for a second?
Yeah, sorry guys. Let's take a 5-minute break. Thanks for bringing that up.
I'll be back in 5 minutes.
All right, see you guys in a little bit.
much more you got, JC?
What's that?
How much more you got?
Well, we got to set up the vehicle cards. At that point, add MQTT and async storage.
All right. So you got about an hour.
Yeah, about an hour.
Probably do that. Seems like the cards should be relatively straightforward, right? Although it's pretty tedious. Placing all those text divs.
It's a lot of styling.
Maybe just copy and paste it in.
Yeah, I'll get through it.
Not particularly adding anything.
Okay, that's just cruel, JC. Because, like, has someone eating an apple, it's like the sound of opening pop. It has that just as soon as you hear it, you're like, oh, I really want one of those.
You know what's bad is I probably go through like a bag of apples every 2 days.
See, that's nice.
What's that?
That's nice.
Yeah, I think I eat too many apples. When I was a kid, my mom, she'd buy like the Granny Smith ones, and they're really acidic, right?
Yep, they are.
And I ate so many once that like my mouth started. I had like a rash started like coming out of my mouth. I think it was like a day I ate like 8 Granny Smith apples or something, and my body couldn't handle it.
I think that's one of the things that my Robbie, who's 15 now, almost 16, he has braces and he's had them for the last like 2 years. And he misses like carrots and apples because he can't chew in, he can't bite into them. And he looks at us just with these longing whenever we eat apples. So we don't have as many in the house because it's like really cruel. He's sitting there in front of him eating these apples and he's like looking at you with this, it's like a dog and you have a cookie. They're just looking at you desperately with I want that. I really want that.
And it's not like eating like cut up apples. It's not the same, right?
No, and we can cut it into the little tiny, the way that you would do with a toddler, which is essentially what we do for him. And it's just, no, it's that crisp, lovely sound of apples that, no.
Yeah,
So is it local for you, the apples? Like, can you get them or do you get them imported?
I mean, I get them at the grocery store. I've never checked the origin of these apples to know where they're grown. I mean, down here, most of the fruits are natural. You get a lot of fruits and a lot of juices. So, and I like, if you walk through the store, I mean, there's so many of them. I don't even know all the names that they have for them in English.
Except I think at least with the apples, I thought they required some coolness. So I know they come from Chile and I know that they come, but I don't think they come from really hot climates themselves. But I don't.
No, I mean, that's really possible. I will say that I don't know if I can think of any fruits that I haven't been able to find down here that I'm.
Oh, I'm sure that's true. Yeah.
It is funny though. Out of all the juices, the one that makes me feel most back in the U.S. would be orange juice.
Is that just because you can't get? I mean, you can get oranges down there, right?
Yeah, they have orange juice here. I'm just saying it's the one juice that is exactly. The orange juice here tastes exactly like orange juice in the U.S. It's no different.
That's cool.
So even if it's some other like species of orange or whatever. It's the taste is
Just tastes exactly the same.
what
See-
what is really different in terms of I guess I think technically it's a fruit. Is avocado a fruit?
I think botanically, yes, it is.
I was gonna say, does anybody know the answer to that question? I don't know.
Like avocados are about like 4 times the size. Like because the avocados in the U.S., for example, are from Mexico, and they're about like the size, like a little bit smaller than the size of a fist, right?
Yeah.
Avocados here are about the size of my head. So
Wow.
Yeah, the Haas avocado that we have is it was very specifically selected, and the farmer that originated it, I guess, it was kind of a very well known and for its texture and taste and everything like that.
Yeah, the avocados in the U.S. they taste much better than the big avocados here. I don't like the avocados here, except for they do have one way they prep them is it's like an avocado smoothie, but they actually they mix it with banana in a blender.
Nice.
A little bit of, you put like a little bit of avocado, some banana in a blender, and a little bit of milk, and it's actually really good. It's a meal. So, if you ever curious.
I gotta try that. I have an avocado and a banana upstairs. I'm gonna try that.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to. I'll let Tim and Robbie try those.
So Brazil is 11th in apple production.
Really? Wow. I would
as of
never,
2017.
I'd have never thought that. Wow. This tells you how provincial I am.
So Justin, you love apples, or you took that thing seriously that an apple a day keeps doctor away?
Oh no, it's just it's something from when I was a kid. I don't know. I've had an addiction for apples ever since I was really, really little.
All right.
Yeah, it's like coffee.
What?
I don't know. I'm in a bad mood if I don't have an apple at home.
As a mother, listen, I'd be thrilled if that was what my kids were addicted to.
Yes.
Don't have a problem with that.
Sure.
All right, so who's ready to finish up this app? You guys ready? Rested? All right. We don't have too much left, so it's going to be I think it'll take up the next hour. But what we're going to do now, I can summarize this. We got what we want. This is our account page. We can actually log in, log out, right? What we want to do is set up the vehicle cards, right? Just like in our here we go. Let me log back in. Just on our web view here, right? We want to render these individual cards. So try to get the styling really similar here. Vertically on this page. And that's where that safe view area that BJ was talking about at the beginning will come into place, because we want to make sure those cards don't overlap up here, right? And then once we get that in, we're going to add MQTT, and then we'll add our equivalent version of local storage, and we should have it's a fully functioning app. At that point, I'll show you guys the command to publish this, and I'll send everybody a link. If you downloaded the Expo app already, I'll send you a link. I'll send you credentials to log into it so that you can run this app that we're building right now. So let's get started. I'm going to start off by making vehicle cards. So here in library, let's make a vehicle card. All right. I'm gonna just copy and paste this list item real quick, get our imports. And then to save some time, let's copy and paste all the styles for this vehicle card. All right, so each of the cards, you got your card style with your shadow offset. That gives it that 3D view, right? It'll have a header, it's got a content container, and then an image container. And we're gonna want moment in this because we need that from this time feature, right? I'll call this vehicle card. And I'm actually gonna come into the vehicle card that we already made and copy and paste some stuff in, right? So this is the vehicle card that we had already. So we're gonna want vehicle heading, right? To grab all this stuff off of props. We already know that we'll pass that down. So we should have vehicle with a year, model, make. And then if you look here, we've got, this is our last report, and then vehicle data. I'm actually gonna pull these up. So this is gonna be a small deviation. We'll say last report text. I want to grab this guy here. So if there's vehicle data for this particular vehicle UID, and it has a timestamp, then we'll render all this good stuff here. Otherwise, give us some ellipses. All right. And then the next thing that we want is our last data text. All right. So how was that represented in our vehicle card? Right here. We'll do our same checks. The reason I'm doing it this way is because this question mark here is fairly newer ECMAScript, and my linter complains to me. So I'm writing this out the old way. It just checks whether or not these fields exist, etc. So what string that is what you get out of this plus meters per second, right? Because that's going to be the speed. Otherwise, just give it some ellipses. All right. So it looks like something's slightly off here. Oh, I got to get rid of these question marks here. All right, there we go. Let's grab our list item that we used in the other cards, right? Get cracking on here. So we need our outer container. The styles would be card. I want to import image from React Native. That'll be that, remember this image here at the very top of the card. It gets the image container, and then the source, we provide a URI here, and that'll be the vehicle.image URL. Now what we want is another view, and this will be our content. right? Up here we've got our image container, and then we've got our content container, right? There's our content container, and then we want our header. That's where we're going to provide our vehicle heading. Right, that's your year, model, make, and name. And we want our list item here. It's our list item that has a label. And we just start going through them, right? We got name. Let's look at these cards. Name, color, last report, and last data. The text is going to be vehicle.name. The next one's going to be color. We'll have last report. And that's where this last report text comes in that we came up with up here. And we also have last data. All right. And then if you look down here at the very bottom, you actually get the vehicle UID. So we're going to add a small thing in here to represent that vehicle UID. I'll wrap it up in a view so we can get some extra space. Here's the text. Vehicle.UID. And I'm going to use an inline style. Make the font size pretty small. Color it a light gray. And then this view is just so I can add a little bit of, if you look here, you got some extra space, right? We can add some margin top to this. Right? So that's our vehicle card, but we can't see it yet until we actually render it with the vehicle page, right? So we want to come down here to our vehicle screen. We're going to need to import the vehicle context, right? And we also need to import our vehicle card. Let's see what I named it here. Yeah, vehicle card. Let's make sure we exported this as well. All right, so that's been exported. And what we can do is we can actually grab the vehicle list and the vehicle data from that context. Okay, and then just like before, let's check out, we're gonna crib from our vehicles page, right? And we wanna grab this here, make up our vehicle card list. We can actually copy and paste this in, right? Only difference is we don't have P tags. We wanna set, actually give it a text tag instead of P. Right? So that's the vehicle card list. And then we need a couple other things. So it's automatic. You can kind of scroll here on a web browser, but within React Native, you actually have to provide a specific type of view called a scroll view. So we want to import something called scroll view. from React Native. And I'm going to get rid of this text field here and bring in the scroll view. And then inside of that, I'm going to place the vehicle card list inside of a view. So let's see. We're not seeing any vehicles in here yet, are we? Let's try logging out. Actually, I'm going to shake this thing, just make sure it reloads. There we go. All right. So you see we got some cards started up here. Now let's finish styling this. This isn't, we're getting close, but this isn't exactly right. And do you see what BJ mentioned earlier about that safe context or that safe area? Right, we're violating that safe area, so we need to work with that as well. Now, what's nice is Expo actually comes with something called constants. And this has a property on it called status bar height that works with this height. But what we're going to do is we're actually going to bake that status bar height into the styles for this. I'm going to copy and paste the styles. All right. So what we got here, we've got a main container, our scroll view, and our vehicles container. So I'm going to add those names in. So instead of this style here, we'll call this styles.main container. All right. Scroll view, and then the style here, there's styles dot vehicles container. There we go. That's a little bit better, right? You see how we're no longer violating that status bar height. So if we look here in the styles, in that main container, we have a margin top, and we're grabbing that status bar height, and I'm adding another 10 pixels in. I'm saying, okay, give me status bar height, and then give me some extra margin here. And it essentially what it does is it forces this in on the top. All right. Well, one other thing I want to do, I want to go ahead and I want to just make these list items a little bit more representative like they are here. So what I'm going to make, instead of this list item, I'm going to copy and paste this and make one called a soft list item. All right. And here I'm going to copy and paste some more styles. This will bring in the styles that, a lot of the styles that you saw in the other web app, which is essentially what we do is we for each of these items make a flex container, and it has two items, but they're in line with each other. And the first one has a fixed width, which gives you this nice kind of inline behavior here between name, Dearborn, color blue, etc. Right, and so what you see is the title here. We're going to give each element a title, and it's going to have a fixed width of 80. Right, that way you get that kind of nice aligned behavior. And here so this is still an item container, right? But what I can do is I can set two children that are text. So the first one will be this will be label, right? I want to change this instead of title to label. I'll call this styles.label. And then the next one will be value. Call this soft list item. And I want to import this in lieu of the other one. And that is actually going to go in the card. So it's in the same folder. And all I need to do down here is change this name to soft. Anybody know where we're getting logged out each time? It's because we're not using local storage yet, which we're going to add in a little bit. So every time I refresh, it gets those initial values and says we're not authenticated. So we go to the vehicles page now. Here we go. So now we're starting to look a little bit closer. We got those styles matched up. All right, so those are our vehicle cards. And then what we want to do now is actually set it up so that we got that data for, latest data when it would go and request it, or in the last report, but this isn't going to update live because we don't have MQTT yet. So what we need to do, I'm going to save our progress here. Well, let's add vehicle card to this commit. So what we want to do, let's reference back here at our front-end React, create this custom hooks folder. I'm actually going to copy and paste this thing directly. So we got our custom hooks. We need to actually use Yarn to add MQTT. We haven't added that yet. Yarn add MQTT. And in React Native, you actually have to reference this a little bit. I was running into some difficulty, and after reading through enough Stack Overflow, they decided to do our import through MQTT a little bit differently. So instead of MQTT, it's actually going to be /dist MQTT. All right, and then other than that, this thing's identical. All right, and we can, instead of bringing this in, if you look here, we were bringing this in the vehicles page, right? And we commented before that we actually would like to have MQTT everywhere, right? Updating and setting that, setting the vehicle data when we use it. So what we can do is we can actually copy and paste here. And we'll bring this into our main. So in addition to this use effect, we'll bring in use MQTT here. So we just need to import it. Let's check to make sure, look at how it's being exported first. Okay, so it's being exported as a constant. We have to destructure it on the import. The custom hooks, MQTT. And then we also want to grab our base URL from the config file, right? So import config. Right, we have the WebSocket API from there. I'm going to call this mobile client. That way, if we look at the MQTT logs in the back end, we'll actually be able to see whether or not the mobile client's trying to connect. I'm not going to worry about logging that data right now. We've got our set vehicle data handle, right? We have access to this in main, that's already established. We'll be able to see whether or not we're connected, and then we're also going to subscribe to all of the data topics, right? And let's make sure we have vehicle list here. So we want to bring in vehicle list, right? Let's see if there's anything else that we need. I think that should be it. So if we haven't broken it, we should have MQTT. All right, can't find variable user. What did we miss? We need the token and the user. So we got to bring in the user context in addition to the auth context, which we have access to, right? So there's our user UID, because that's the username that's used for authentication with MQTT, right? And then we use the token for the password. See if we're good now. All right, let's give this thing a shot. I'm going to open up another terminal. I'm going to start up Sumo and see if this, let's see if this app actually updates. We'll go into our embedded here. I need to start up a virtual environment. Activate it. Install our dependencies. All right, so the dependencies are installed. I'm going to launch X windows in the background. That way the Sumo GUI actually starts up. And then remember I have to set my environment variable so I can access Sumo Home here. And then I should be able to go ahead and launch that simulation. So what do we see? This is hooked up to the production backend. We're posting some data. Right, looks like that vehicle is running. Let's look at the simulator. Last report a few seconds ago. There we go. Look, updating live. We got MQTT hooked up to our mobile application already. And if you notice, we didn't change hardly anything in order to hook that up, right? It was the exact same library, copy paste, right? Change a couple lines just based on the way I've got it structured, but it really. All right, so we'll add that as a checkpoint.
That's a fully native app too. That is like all the apps that we use every day, except for you, Beth Ann.
So now that we've got this in here, the last big thing we really need to add in is local storage, right? What we want to add, how we add local storage, I'm going to, inside of library, I'm going to make a folder called local storage. And then I'll make a file called local storage.js in order to, what I'm going to do, and this is common, you guys remember the discussions we had about using third-party services, et cetera. It's the same concept that you implement the exact same type of API. Let's look at the way that local storage worked in the browser, right? So its API is a method called getItem, which takes in a string, right? And then there's another one called set item, which takes in 2 arguments. The first one's a string, and the second one is another string, key value pair. So what we want to do is we want to export something that implements essentially the same type of behavior. And we can do that through what's called async storage. So I'm going to import async storage from React Native. Now, the only deviation that this is going to cause is, if you notice by the name, it's async. So what does that mean? If it's async, any idea?
It's going to give a promise.
Exactly. So, and if you look at the way it's referenced here, I can set get item and set item, and I don't have to worry about promises because these are synchronous calls. They're not async. So unfortunately, it's not going to be a one-to-one, right? Because I'm going to have to await them. But
Right.
it's going to get us, well, we're going to probably get about, I'd say it's 90% the way there in terms of similarity. And if we revert this to do awaits, even though you're not using it asynchronously, you could copy and paste the code. So we'll start here by using a get item. So I can export get item. We know it's going to be async. And if it doesn't exist, its default value should be null. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a try catch. That way we can try to get keys that don't exist, so we don't have to worry about any errors being thrown. And then I'm going to await async storage and say get item. And if it fails, we just leave value equal to null. And then I'll return the value.
One thing to point out here is, he's obviously emulating the local storage of the browser here, right? There's no concept of actually local storage for a mobile app. It's not a thing. He's using async storage. But one of the things to mention here is that if you remember in the browser, local storage is a synchronous operation. It's not async, right? So it's a totally blocking situation, whereas this is async. And so it's going to change a little bit. It's going to give you a little bit more power to do this from an asynchronous standpoint to access that memory. Because really what we're looking for is some sort of, we're using asynchronous storage as basically a memory store, right? So if the app closes and you open it back up again, you get the data again, right? You don't lose any of that kind of stuff, anything in your app. So that's one of the key differences between these two: local storage and async storage on React Native and, well, native development in general.
Yeah, so if we wanted to use these in exact the same way, you'd have to essentially artificially wrap everything in promises in the other case. Or you could await them when you don't need to, right? But by simulating this, we're getting kind of as close to the same experience as you can. So we got get item, and the other one we want is to use set item. Right, and that's going to take a key value pair. We want to await this here. All right, so that gives us our get item and our set item. And then what we need to do, we're going to bring those into our custom, or sorry, our context. And we want to import star as local storage from local storage here. All right, now we can use that get item and set item in a very similar fashion. The only difference is these use states, they don't like to, when you initialize them, they don't like to take in a async function. So we'll do something similar to what we did with that component mount to get the vehicle data initially. We're going to use a use effect. And then I'm going to define an async function in here and call it init state. Declare a variable called local data. And then await. This is why it changes. You have to await the local storage now. And get item. I want to get something called auth context. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, you know, if you actually did get something, if this is non-null, remember we turn null if it doesn't exist. I'll parse it because I know that I'm storing it as JSON. Right, that it's a key value pair, but the key is a string and so is the value. And then if it doesn't exist, I'll just bring in the default values, which is authenticated is false, and then the token would be an empty string. And then what we can do is we can actually use these setters. We'll say set is authenticated. Local data dot is authenticated. We also say set token. And then this hasn't been called yet. So what we need to do is we need to run it. And then our dependencies are nothing. So this only really needs to run once, and it's the first time that this auth context provider gets mounted. That'll run this, get the values from the async storage, or in our case, we're calling it the local storage, and then it will set them to initialize them. So they'll first start as these defaults, and then as soon as that network request comes in or that async request finishes, it'll get those values and it'll set them. So we don't need this here anymore. This is what essentially used to do that get item, and it would set the is authenticated initially. And we don't need this anymore because it would actually set the initial token, but we do want this guy here, right? We do want this. This is async. We can leave it alone because we don't actually have to await anything here, right? And so I can, in effect, use local storage.set item in exactly the same way it was used before. All right.
You don't technically have to await it there, but wouldn't necessarily hurt to make sure that you set it in the appropriate amount of time before the use effect gets finished, in case you need to do auth checking, right?
Yeah. So
I guess
we could do a similar thing that we did here. Yeah, I'll do that here. So we can define another async function and call it set storage.
Yeah, you'd probably never have an issue, but just in case.
We'll say try here. We'll await it and then catch. We'll log the error if there's something that went wrong, right? And then what we can do is just call that function.
Leave that to you guys as the watchers to figure out why we just changed that. Exercise to the reader, I guess.
Now, this recipe that we're using here, it's pretty much the exact same thing that we're going to use for our user context. So I'll bring this in. It's actually simpler because if you remember, we call this user context. We only have one variable we care about, which is user. Its default value is an empty object, right? We want to use set user. we'll wrap up this use effect like we did before. Call it inside of set storage here. Right, so that gets called and set. That's our user context, and then we want to carry this over as well to our vehicle context. So in here, we're going to get the vehicle context. And this will help out even on our load times, right? When you refresh, reload, if it can get it from async storage, it doesn't have to wait on that request to return from the back end in order to load up your vehicle cards. Right, and then in this case, it's going to be vehicle list, which is going to be defaulting to an empty array, and then vehicle data defaults to an empty object. And this can be set vehicle list, right, for knitting the state, as well as setting vehicle data. We don't need these anymore, since that's what our init state right here does. And then for a use effect in the same way, we can define our own set storage. Right, we'll grab vehicle context instead of user context, and we want to set the vehicle context as well. All right, and that right there should have hooked it all up. So let's come in here, we'll shake our app to reload. Can't find variable local storage. Why is that? It's because we didn't import it. So I imported it for auth context, but I forgot. Got a little ahead of myself here on user, as well as we need it for vehicle. All right, let's reload, see if those warnings go away. Can't find variable local storage. Odd.
Maybe how you're exporting local storage, because you're importing it almost like a TypeScript sort of module.
Yeah, let me check.
You may have to default that.
No, these.
Yeah, I mean,
Or
I don't think you have to do the import star as, since you're using the ECMA 6. Why don't you try importing get and set directly as a destructuring?
what? And then creating a local storage variable that equals that.
Yeah, because otherwise you'd have to do a module that exports, I think, in module that exports, old style.
There we go. Now, if we make a change and we reload this, let's check out how fast it actually ends up loading these pages. Valid prop color.
It's like a typo.
Like vehicle card problem.
Looks like you got 2 C's as opposed to 3 somewhere. There it is on line 2.
Well, you know what it could be?
No, it's just the pound CC right there.
Oh, there it is.
Just added another C. There you go. It's not a valid hex code.
So if I shake this now, what you should see is it should stay on this page instead of logging us out, but it didn't. Why is that? Because we should still be authenticated. So I think what we need to do actually, let's check this out. If we're already authenticated and we know it and we have it from local storage, why don't we open up our login screen? Since its initial route name, it goes to login upon refresh. We should have access actually to the navigator in here, which we use to go to main, right? Well, let's just grab is authenticated off of the context as well. And if it is authenticated already, let's grab the token too, just to make sure there is a token in memory, because it's going to need that to hit the routes, right? And the token has some length. We're going to use navigation to go straight to main, right? There you go. We actually went into main. I didn't have to log in. Why? Because we had the token. We logged in. It's already been authenticated, right? Similarly, one thing that we should do, and we haven't done right as of yet, I don't think so anyway, as part of handling the log out, we should actually probably clear out, just like we did before. You remember, set user, we clear all this out and set ourselves as not being authenticated anymore. I'm gonna grab everything here real quick. Come back down. And we're gonna want, it's gonna be set user. I want these two from the auth context. We gotta make sure that we're actually importing that context. We got user, but we need auth still. So all I'm doing here is inside of the handle logout, I'm setting the user back to nothing, right? Setting the token back to empty, as well as setting is authenticated to false. All right, so let's go ahead and let's do a shake and make sure that this thing comes right back to the main. There you go. And when I come into vehicles page, you can see how quick it's loaded. Why? It's because it's all there in local storage.
Already done some cache optimization right there in our app. The power of context and persistence.
Yep, and you can see how simple it was. All I had to do is go right into the context, integrate it in, and none of the other code had to change.
And in just a few hours, basically have a full native mobile app from our app that we created before. It's all pretty cool, if you ask me.
Go ahead and add this up here. Now, how many of you guys actually downloaded Expo? Everybody?
Good.
All right. All right. We're going to give this a test drive. I want people to be downloading this on their phones here in a second.
So I don't have a phone, so you'll have to excuse me about that.
No worries.
I don't actually have a smartphone. I've got to figure out. So on office hours, you can explain to me how I do this. If I have neither a Mac nor a smartphone.
Beth Ann, at that point, you give up. I'm sorry.
Okay.
You could go through the hassle of downloading a Android emulator on your computer and then try to bring it into the Android emulator, install Expo on that. So,
Or I could actually just start up the smartphone that I actually do have.
I would go to Walmart, buy a $100 cheap phone, pay as you go.
Oh no, I've got the phone. It's just the paying for it in Canada.
Well, yeah. Well, go to
Yeah.
Walmart, buy one of the pay as you go cards.
Yeah.
20 bucks.
Okay, I will.
Or just use Wi-Fi. You don't have to get a SIM card for a smartphone. Just use Wi-Fi.
So that I can do.
all right. So what you guys can do if you do this yourselves, I've already uploaded this app, but what you will do, here are the steps. So within the repo, you would say Expo login, and it'll ask you, says you're already logged in as Full Stack SE, and this is the username I set up for everybody here. You'll be able to download this app here. I can say log in as a new user. The username is Full Stack SE, just like our domain. The password is also Full Stack SE, just like the domain. All right, success, you're logged in. So you need to log in via the Expo CLI, not just Expo login. And then in order to publish, it's simply Expo publish. And then I can even set up a release channel as an option, right? And I'll just say week 10 live. And so what it'll do is it's looking at the SDK that I have for Expo. Here's the release channel that was set, and then the workflow. And it's automatically already setting up, bundling, compiling, and it's going to put that up on the Expo servers to be distributed. Now, this is running, and you'll be able to access it later, but I already have one that's uploaded there for you guys. I'll provide the link here. Like I said, the username is FullStackSE, and the password is also FullStackSE. If we log in here, you should see, as soon as you log in on your phone, you should see something called mobile-app. All right. And once you log in, if you click this app, I'll put this link here in the Slack channel. And you guys can actually load it up. I'll bring it up on my phone. See if I can find my phone here. Anybody got, BJ, you got it up on yours?
No, sorry, I got distracted. Anyone got it up?
Yeah,
I could.
mine.
Shweta, you were able to bring it up?
Yes.
Look at that.
And I tried my login, not the lorem ipsum, the one
So-
you had.
Let's test this out real quick. I'm going to run a vehicle simulation, and we will see if this thing actually starts updating on your phone. Here you go. We're posting data up to the cloud, right? And you should see that very first blue vehicle actually changing its velocity.
Yeah, I wanted to show you that. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
And it's all JavaScript.
That is way cool.
That vehicle's running in Brazil too. Shweta, you're able to see it wherever you are on your phone.
Mhm.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I'm posting this data from down here.
To New York, and then over to Shweta, or anyone else who's got it up.
That really is way cool.
Nice work, JC. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So you could see why we enjoy doing this probably at this point. Takes a lot of effort, I know, a lot of learning. You still got an uphill battle to get all this stuff, but it's very rewarding when it all comes together. And then next week we're gonna be doing some optimization, so it gets even better. Some machine learning.
Hit right on the head in terms of taking 3 hours.
Yeah. And then what I was going to do today, don't worry, we'll get to it, but I won't do it next week, but I'll do it the week after. But it's advanced deployment. It'll work out because we decided, because I'll also do examples of real case studies of things that we've done in the past and how things are deployed and stuff like that, talk through provisioning, stuff like that. So it'll be a good kind of thing. So we didn't really miss anything. It's just a matter of pushing it for a couple weeks. All right. Any questions?
Good.
Justin, we can access this app through Expo only. So to get it on, say, any of the app stores like Apple or Android, Google Play, it's different steps altogether. That would be going through their channel.
Completely
Well,
different.
so you'll use Expo as part of that. Let me pull up that diagram that I had earlier.
It's actually a very frustrating process to go on the app stores, not Google, but Apple. There's a lot of administrative things you have to do. You have to go through a review process and all this kind of stuff. It can take up to a week or two to get the app initially. Um, but what Justin will show you is you basically will download in what we call an IPA, which is basically the file format for like an iOS app, or an APK, which is
For
the
Android?
file format for it's a bundle, little zip bundle of Google. And what you do is you upload those to the respective stores, and then they will verify it. And you got to put all your marketing stuff in there, and all the naming and stuff, and icons, and all that kind of stuff. It's more of a marketing game than it is a technical thing. Um, but yeah, there's some you can do CI/CD with Google. It's very difficult to do CI/CD with Apple, unfortunately, because of all of the review and processy and the marketing and all that kind of stuff. But Expo does do a lot of it for you. More of the tedious parts it takes care of, like the building of those binaries, stuff like that. But yeah, it's something you can read about on Google if you ever needed to do it. It's not rocket science. There's tons of different write-ups for that, and you know, there's also a bunch of games you got to play and all that kind of crap with Apple sometimes, depending on what you're doing, so they don't take the haircut that they like, the 30% if you're collecting payments, and so there's a lot of stuff kind of in it, but it's more like call someone who's done it before kind of thing than suffer through it for the first time.
Yeah, like BJ mentioned, the native app binary files. So if it's an iOS app, it's going to be IPA for the file extension, and then it's going to be an APK if it were a Android app. And then in terms of the actual nuts and bolts of how you would get those built with Expo, like literally, it is Expo build iOS or Expo build Android. And just like what's happening here on this publish here, where that publish is complete, and I already went and set up the release channel, just like I specified, it will go up and it will upload that binary build and then give you a link that you can monitor, because they have a certain set of servers that are being used to go through the build. So you could be in a queue, but once it's finished building, you just go to that link. You can download your binaries and upload them to the proper stores, right? Be it that Apple Store, or if you're going through the Google Play Store.
That's why we use Expo, because setting that up on your own machine is a pain to get the Android Studio or the Xcode for Apple for Mac, and you have to have a Mac to do it if you're going to do it. So So yeah, that's why we use Expo whenever we can.
Expo is pretty incredible. They make your life very easy.
Yeah, get somewhere really fast, pretty powerful. It does have limitations. It's not the end all be all, but it does. You'll cover probably a good 60 to 70% of all cases you can cover with Expo.
I mean, you put it to put it one way. If let's say you want to do this with native app developers, you probably need two different people, separate developers, just to develop each native app separately.
It truly is. Yeah, I mean, you see all the stuff here. I mean, it's that we've gone through just in the last what 11 weeks, 10 weeks. It it's the same deal with Android and iOS. It's a very deep knowledge base.
At what point are you going to start running into limitations? I mean, it seems that this probably would handle most business related passing data around, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
Maybe not gaming or something like that.
that's where you start running into it is AR, augmented reality, and virtual reality. Any kind of VR stuff, you'll run into it very fast, and then gaming. So if you want to do like Candy Crush or want to re-implement Fortnite or something, yeah, or even Minecraft is going to be somewhat difficult to do in React Native. You can do it, but you have to write React Native bindings probably to get the performance and all that kind of stuff. Occasionally you'll hear people say that they can't get the animations that they want, like swipe animations and stuff like that. I've never had an issue with it. If I've needed it, I just write a React binding for it. And honestly, is someone going to notice that you don't have the latest cutting edge animation? No. I mean, they're just not going to notice. So, I mean, it's always that that optimization problem of what do the designers want me to do and what is actually reasonable, right? So yeah, that's where you get run into it. So if you're going into gaming, yeah, you're gonna have to develop those native skills. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. But for 60 to 70% of all the stuff that we typically have to do as engineers, this is more than adequate.
So there's an option to open up the project using the QR code. So could we still use that and open it up now?
Um, well, you could because it's running on. So the QR code is designed to open it up based on the running server that he has running locally on his machine. Now he could start a server that, like with ngrok, that could access it, and then your QR code would work. Otherwise, you'll want to start on your machine, and then you'll do it with the QR code, and you'll want to be on your own local network because it's all done over the network. So it all has to do with that where that server is running. But if you have it running on your machine right now, yeah, you can scan it with your QR code, and you can do, both iOS or Android. But you would be able to shake your phone and stuff like that to do the reload. Because it was kind of weird. Justin was saying shake, right? It's like what a shit. Like why? Well, actually, when you're doing development on a real phone, which we do a lot because we want to make sure it actually works, you'll shake it and it'll refresh automatically. So it's a nice little development thing. If you shake it, it'll refresh. So that's what that QR code really is for. And that QR code right there is to just basically, if you have your Expo app, you can take a picture of it and it'll open it up in Expo too. Way to grab it. iOS is a little bit more frustrating. They have like certificate things because of the security strategies. And so Android's very open, but Apple, you'll have to actually be logged into this, to the full stack SE, log in with Expo to do that.
Yeah, it does open up. Yeah, that's so wonderful.
Cool, yeah. So if you scan that QR code, then it's probably running the one from Expo that's been uploaded to Expo, as opposed to Justin. Now, the one that you could scan is Justin's one that came up in his terminal. You could scan that, but that's for his local development.
I don't know if we can still see it.
Yeah, you probably lost it in the history, but
It's probably buried at this point.
But somewhere, like when he started Expo, it'll start up.
Here, I'll kill it and then start Expo back up.
Yeah, this will should start relatively quickly, and then it'll give you see a QR code. And then that QR code that it's going to show you is for his server right there. There, that QR code is for what's running on his current machine right now. So that won't work if you try to scan that QR code. But Justin, if you go to the Metro, you can choose to say, see where it says the connection. You can do tunnel, LAN, or local. And so if you do the tunnel, anyone will be able to do that and run it on their phone locally. Because that's basically like an ngrok thing. Because you'll notice it gives you an actual URL. So, lots of cool stuff. All right, guys, any other questions? Cool. Well, you can ask us more on Tuesday, and then we only got a couple weeks left. And then you will be official professionals. Right? You'll be experts. That's how this works, right? So yeah, no, this is good. So yeah, I'll see you guys on Tuesday, and then you know, those of you can make it, and then Thursday we'll do optimization, and then the next week we'll do a bunch of case studies and stuff like that, and finish it up, get your guys' feedback, and talk about what next steps are. All right, guys, have a good night.
All right, see you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Nice work, Jason.